Everyone wants to talk about the president's phone call and the Ukraine story. But what is the Ukraine story exactly? Well, let's bring on Andrew Mccarthy, contributing editor at National Review, of course, a Fox News contributor. And his book is Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andrew, I'm getting deja vu with this whole meddling in an election thing here.
Yeah, can you imagine? You would think, Larry, that like maybe this has happened before.
Well, certainly the media would have us think that. But let's start with this phone call. What do we really know about this? And is this a classic whistleblower situation, or is there something else at play?
Well, I don't think it's a whistleblower situation, at least not as the law that pertains to whistleblowers would have it. I mean, I guess if you consider a whistleblower situation any situation where you have somebody inside the government who is inhibited from speaking because of some procedures or rules or employment conditions, and becomes aware of misconduct that the person perceives that he wants to disclose, I guess that's the classic whistleblower situation. But what we heard last week about this whistleblower statute, which I think, as I wrote in a column over the weekend at National Review, the least important aspect of this whole fiasco is the statute. Then no, I don't think it's a whistleblower statute, because that statute doesn't apply to the president. It applies to...
Yeah, and yet, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Andrew.
No problem.
But what's occurred though is this media frenzy and a high-level chairman of committees in the House of Representatives demanding hearings and demanding, Nancy Pelosi saying we're moving toward impeachment, where we have one anonymous person who, as you said, has acted outside of the realm of the whistleblower statute and it sounds to me like what we know of this is that it's hearsay, actually, that they didn't actually have firsthand knowledge of this conversation that the president had.
Well, Larry, from what I read, I think that you're understating it by saying impeachment, because I saw Bill Weld, who I must say many years ago I used to admire. He was a high-ranking official at the Justice Department before he was in politics in Massachusetts. But I read he today said that Trump had committed treason and that the penalty for treason was death. So I think if you're just gonna talk about little old impeachment, then you're simply not taking this seriously enough.
So I'm speechless at that. This is a man who says, so we got to kill the president now because of this conversation. Is there any precedent in American history, Andrew McCarthy, where a president's private conversation with another leader is leaked in this way, all based on hearsay, and suddenly that he's being called a treasonous or at least impeachable?
Yeah, well, regrettably, the precedents that exist for the intelligence community leaking the details of the conversations of the president are earlier in this president's term. And I think that these guys, and look, I don't want to belittle the idea of, the wrongness, if it happened, of elevating your political interests over the national interest. Which is what the nub of this whole thing is. Although I think if they thought this was a serious offense, they wouldn't be screaming about a statute that doesn't apply. But I'm not trying to say that that's unimportant. But I do think, Larry, that we got to get a grip here. I mean, let's say the worst thing possible that's been alleged actually happened here, which is that Donald Trump, as president, is talking to the president of Ukraine and basically says or holds out or creates the impression that defense aid that the Ukrainians desperately need, that's been authorized by Congress, is going to be withheld unless they do an investigation of Biden that will help Trump's campaign. If that's what happened, that is not a good thing. But to call it an impeachable offense, or to act like Trump would be the first president in history to wield his power as president with an eye toward his political standing and his electoral prospects for re-election, I think is pretty ridiculous. And in fact, I would say that Trump would be closer to the 45th president to have done that than the first. And again, I just wrote a book, that you were kind enough to mention, the upshot of which is that we need to return to a norm where government powers, whether they're the ability to conduct foreign relations or foreign intelligence collection, should not be used to affect partisan politics. Yeah. I'm completely on board with that idea. But, we have to get back to a place where we can say something has happened that shouldn't have happened, and at the same time that we don't lose our touch with reality and start talking about, that whoever did it has to be drawn and quartered.
Yeah, impeachment, treason, and let's get the gallows primed. But
right.
But Andrew McCarthy, ironically, you just said, elected officials should not put his personal gain in front of, the affairs of state. But the crux of this and what's alleged is that the president was asking the Ukrainian president to look into why the prosecutor was fired, the prosecutor that was looking into Hunter Biden's behavior. Joe Biden is bragging about the fact on audio that he got that guy fired, and he threatened to withhold $1 billion loan guarantee unless he got fired. I mean, that's worth looking into.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the idea that because Trump may have raised it in a ham-handed way, we should somehow insulate or immunize Biden from being from his conduct in office being inquired into, I think is ridiculous. This is, all you have to do, Larry, is just turn this around and change the names and say that instead of dealing with Hunter Biden, we're talking about Eric Trump or Don Trump Jr. We wouldn't have to be screaming for answers about that. We would already have them.
That's right.
This would have been investigated to the ground. The Washington Post and the New York Times would have, as usual, assigned 5 to 10 of their alpha reporters onto this thing. We'd have breathless reports and updates every 15 minutes on CNN and MSNBC. We'd already have had 5 congressional hearings, and we'd have gotten to the bottom of it. We'd probably have a special prosecutor too. But because it's Hunter Biden instead of the Trump kids that we're talking about, the first knee-jerk reaction of the media Democrat complex is that basically this needs to be covered up. And
it appears to me if there's an earnest attempt to look at what the president may have said or may have implored the president of Ukraine to do, or what Rudy Giuliani acting on his behalf may have said, then I think the only way to sufficiently have that discussion is to really look at what Hunter Biden was doing and what he may have gotten away with, and what the relationship was with Joe Biden and what Joe Biden may have said. I mean, that it just goes to reason if they're trying to, if Giuliani was trying to accomplish something with regard to Biden, you got to know what it was that Biden had done to know what he was trying to accomplish. So let's have I guess let's look at it. Let's have the transparency.
Larry, I think that's right. I also think that you go into it saying, just as with Trump, the fact that he raised something about investigating Biden to the Ukrainians, which under the circumstances it was something that was foolish for him to raise in this context, that doesn't mean that necessarily he's done anything terrible. And the fact that Joe Biden had a conflict of interest in what he has conceded was pressuring Ukraine to fire a prosecutor who it turns out was investigating a company that his son was on the board of. You can have a conflict of interest and still act properly. So I think what we're saying here is we just want to know what happened.
What's what happened?
And if what happened ends up damaging the people who did whatever they did politically, then that's the way our system works. But I don't, this idea that we should all jump to the conclusion of people need now to be in jail or impeached or put to death for treason. I just think that's insane.
You think that might be overstating the case? Well, we'll see. There you go. Bill Weld has lost Andrew McCarthy's vote there in the primary. Thank you, Andrew. Good to talk to you as always.
Thanks, Larry.